أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى ونيسرك لليسرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى سيذكر من يخشى ويتجنبها الأشقى الذي يصلى النار الكبرى ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم احرسني بحراستك واحفظني بحفظك واكلئني بكلاءتك وارزقني حج بيتك الحرام في عامي هذا وفي كل عام وارزقني زيارة قبر نبيك صلواتك عليه وآله والأئمة عليهم السلام ولا تخلني يا رب من تلك المشاهد الشريفة والمواقف الكريمة. اللهم وتب علي حتى لا أعصيك. اللهم وتب علي حتى لا أعصيك والهمني الخير والعمل به وخشيتك بالليل والنهار ما بقيتني يا رب العالمين. اللهم إني كلما قلت قد تهيأت وتعبأت وقمت للصلاة بين يديك وناجيتك ألقيت علي نعاسا إذا أنا صليت وسلبتني مناجاتك إذا أنا ناجيت ما لي كلما قلت قد صلحت سريرتي وقرب من مجالس التوابين مجلسي عرضت لي بلية أزالت قدمي وحالت بيني وبين خدمتك سيدي لعلك عن بابك طردتني وعن خدمتك نحيتني أو لعلك رأيتني مستخفا بحقك فأقصيتني أو لعلك رأيتني معرضا عنك فقليتني أو لعلك وجدتني في مقام الكاذبين فرفضتني أو لعلك رأيتني غير شاكر لنعمائك فحرمتني أو لعلك فقدتني من مجالس العلماء فخذلتني أو لعلك رأيتني في الغافلين فمن رحمتك آيستني أو لعلك رأيتني آلف مجالس البطالين فبيني وبينهم خليتني أو لعلك لم تحب أن تسمع دعائي فبعدتني أو لعلك بجرمي وجريرتي كافيتني أو لعلك بقلة حيائي منك جازيتني فإن عفوت يا ربي فطالما عفوت عن المذنبين قبلي لأن كرمك يا ربي يجل عن مكافأة المقصرين وأنا عائذ بفضلك هارب منك إليك متنجز ما وعدت من الصفح عمن أحسن بك ظنا إلهي أنت أوسع فضلا وأعظم حلما من أن تقايسني بعملي أو أن تستزلني بخطيئتي وما أنا يا سيدي وما خطري هبني بفضلك يا سيدي وتصدق علي بعفوك وجللني بسترك، واعف عن توبيخي بكرم وجهك. سيدي أنا الصغير الذي ربيته، وأنا الجاهل الذي علمته، وأنا الضال الذي هديته، وأنا الوضيع الذي رفعته، وأنا الخائف الذي آمنته، وأنا الجائع الذي أشبعته، والعطشان الذي أرويته، والعاري الذي كسوته، والفقير الذي أغنيته، والضعيف الذي قويته، والذليل الذي أعززته، والسقيم الذي شفيته، والسائل الذي أعطيته، والمذنب الذي سترته، والخاطئ الذي أقلته. إلهي وأنا القليل الذي كسرته، والمستضعف الذي نصرته، وأنا الطريد الذي آويته، وأنا يا رب الذي لم أستحيك في الخلاء، وأنا يا رب الذي لم أستحيك في الخلاء، ولم أراقبك في الملا، وأنا صاحب الدواهي العظمى، وأنا الذي على سيده اشترى، أنا الذي عصيت جبار السماء، أنا الذي أعطيت على المعاصي جليل الرشاد، أنا الذي حين بشرت بها خرجت إليها أسعى، أنا الذي أمهلتني فمرعوت، أنا الذي أمهلتني فمرعويت، وسترتني علي فما استحييت، وعملت بالمعاصي فتعديت، وأسقطتني من عينك فما باليت، فبحلمك أمهلتني وبسترك سترتني، حتى كأنك غفلتني. ومن عقوباتك المعاصي جنبتني، حتى كأنك استحييتني. إلهي لم أعصك حين عصيتك وأنا بربوبيتك جاحد، ولا بأمرك مستخف، ولا لعقوبتك متعرض، ولا لوعيدك متواهن، ولكن خطيئة عرضت وسولت لي نفسي، وغلبني هواي، وأعانني عليها شوقتي، وغرني سترك المرخى علي، فقد عصيتك وخالفتك بجهدي، فالآن من عذابك من يستنقذني، ومن أيدي الخصماء غدا من يخلصني، وبحبل من أتصل إن أنت قطعت حبلك عني، فوا سوءتا على ما أحصى كتابك من عمل الذي لولا ما أرجو من كرمك ووسعت رحمتك، ونهيك إياي عن القنوت، لقنت عندما أتذكرها. يا خير من دعا هدى، وأفضل من رجاه راج، اللهم بذمة الإسلام يتوسل إليك، وبحرمة القرآن يعتمد عليك، وبحبي لنبي الأمي القرشي الهاشمي العربي التهامي المكي المدني، صلواتك عليه وآله أرجو زلفة لديك، فلا توحش استئناس إيماني، ولا تجعل ثوابي ثواب من عبد سواك، فإن قوما آمنوا بألسنتهم ليحقنوا به دماءهم فأدركوا ما أملوا، وإنا آمنا بك بألسنتنا وقلوبنا لتعفو عنا فأدركنا ما أملنا، وثبت رجاءك في صدورنا، ولا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا، وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب، فوعزتك لو انت أردتني ما برحت عن بابك، ولا كففت عن تملقك، لما ألهم قلبي من المعرفة بكرمك، ووسعت رحمتك إلهي إلى من يذهب العبد إلا إلى مولاه، وإلى من يلتجئ المخلوق إلا إلى خالقه. إلهي لو قرنتني بالأصفاد ومنعتني سيبك من بين الأرشاد، ودللت على فضائح عيون العباد، وأمرت بي إلى النار وحلت بيني وبين الأبرار. ما قطعت رجائي منك ولا صرفت وجه تأميلي للعفو عنك، ولا خرج حبك من قلبي. أنا لا أنسى أياديك عندي وسترك علي في الدار الدنيا. سيدي أخرج حب الدنيا من قلبي واجمع بيني وبين المصطفى وآله خيرتك من خلقك وخاتم النبيين محمد صلى الله عليه وآله برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Just a quick reminder, so please just no food or drink allowed in the chapel except for water. Thank you. Today we have our own Shaykh Tajri, and the talk today is historicizing the Quran, I believe, and how far we can go. Please welcome him with the salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Okay, so Assalamu alaikum everyone. And Muhammad didn't say it this time, he always says it, but I'm going to say it this time. I am going to be relying on the PowerPoint, so as much forward as you can move, probably you can access it and see it better, and that will help you and me both in the presentation. So with the salawat, I'm going to ask you all to move forward as far forward as you can. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You know, normally people who are up here and asking people to come forward, they say, I won't bite. But seeing that we're so close to iftar time, I'm making no promises. So. Right. So, actually, as Zinat keeps reminding me, and I'm sure she'll tell any of you who ask, I was very late in giving her this title. The reason for that is, till very late, I didn't know what I was going to talk about myself. But on the back of Mahdiya's presentation last week and the question and answer kind of deliberation we had, I picked this title and worked on it, raised a few points on it, and the hope is from this presentation and from the next half an hour or so that we have, that we can gain a bit more of a sophisticated understanding about the Quran. As well as reciting it, we can understand it better and have that kind of dynamic engagement with it. So, historicizing the Quran and how far can we go? Of course, the meaning behind the title is to understand the Quran in its historical context, understand that it came at a time and place in history. So, as Nadia mentioned last week after a question that I posed to her, she said this statement quite rightly, that the Quran was not revealed in a vacuum. It means that there was already an existing society there that received the Quran. They had their own norms and values and customs and traditions, and the Quran came to them. So, the first few minutes, understanding that and see how we can see that and appreciate that. So, first of all, from the language, and I think from the formatting, of course, as you can see, it's gone wrong from my laptop to this one or how it's being presented here. But we can hopefully read the beginning or one of the beginning ayah from Surah Yusuf, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyan. Indeed, we have revealed it. Now, Quran, the word literally means that thing which is read, the thing which is recited. And of course, you know the Quran didn't come down as Jibreel giving the Prophet a book. It was words, and it was compiled later on parchment and on leaves and on ribs of animals and on leather, and that's how it was written and later on compiled. So Allah is saying that we have revealed this Quran, this thing which is recited. We have revealed a thing recited, an Arabic one, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ, so that you can understand it. Now, of course, had the Quran been revealed to the Prophet in 7th century Mecca in Mandarin or in Greek or in Latin or English or any other language, the people wouldn't understand it. Or the Prophet might himself not even understand it. So, whereby we might have these romanticized ideas about the Quran is revealed in Arabic because the language of the heavens is Arabic. Or the angels communicate with each other in Arabic. Allah communicates with the angels in Arabic. This is a nonsense. Of course, this, first of all, it plays into the fact that we don't know what really angels are, but that's something we're going to come on to a bit later on. Maybe we'll touch on it. Allah is saying, we revealed an Arabic thing recited, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ, so that you can understand it. Otherwise, you won't be able to understand it, period. But when we talk about language, remember, language doesn't just mean, oh, like Arabic, so anyone can. No, even Arabic has its own special words. The way Arabic was spoken, understood, revealed in what we call Asrun Nuzul, means the era of revelation, is quite different from the Arabic spoken in different places and in different eras. So all of these things include language, the words, the way things are phrased, the syntax and the way sentences are structured is quite different today than it was in the classical period. The similes and metaphors used. So I can see the formatting is not going to work probably for the ayat of the Quran, but we'll work through it. The words is something fascinating as an Arabist and people who are maybe in line with the Arabic language to some degree. It's fascinating, even the words that are used and how we can place the Quran. So for the words, all of these things, of course, must be the syntax, the phrases, the analogies used. Everything has to be accessible for the people who are reading it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for Allah to say it this way. As for the words, I want to pick up on one particular word, but of course they're scattered around the Quran. You can use all of them. Okay, that's supposed to be on the same line again. Like the formatting is not great as the file has been transferred. But the word uswa in the Quran, of course, we had to have the word uswa. What's the wider context of the verses? We have the word uswa. Where is it used? Huh? Yeah, what's the verse? Come on, Ahlul Bayt, following people who are in line with the Quran, yes? Right, so that's one, and probably the most famous place it's used, yes? Or we know that verse most famously. But of course, it's used 2 more times in Surah Al-Mumtahina as well. And that's the verse you mentioned, Tahsin. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. And of course, after that as well, talking about Ibrahim and those who are with him. قَدْ كَانَتْ لَكُمْ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ فِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ. And again, one more time in that same chapter of the Quran as well. Uswa. The Prophet is described as Uswa Hasana. What does it mean? Good example, role model, exemplar, Uswa. The funny thing about the word Uswa, or the very fascinating thing about the word Uswa, is that it was not used outside of Mecca. Even the other people who spoke Arabic didn't use the word Uswa to mean this thing. Furthermore, on the left you can see the word Iswa. Iswa in the red writing there. If we look at the 7th century Meccan setup, we can see some of the tribes that are scattered around. You can see right in the middle there, where there's a clearing where the Kaaba was. This is what it used to look like, right? It doesn't look like, of course, what it looks like today. Mountainous area, and the tribes were living around these regions. You can see the Banu Hashim, of course, the tribe of the Holy Prophet. These are all Qurayshi tribes, all Qurayshi clans together, they make up the Quraysh tribe. The Banu Hashim at the bottom there, I'm going to show a diagram of which tribes use the word Uswa, which is in the Quran now, the way we recite it, and which ones use the word Iswa. The word uswa, you can see, was almost exclusively that dialect used by the Banu Hashim. All the other Qurayshi clans used the word iswa, and beyond that, the word wasn't used at all. Now, I don't know, maybe if we're trying to put it in our context, those of us who speak Gujarati or these Indian languages and have gone to, and our ancestors have traveled or migrated from India to East Africa, and then we've picked up some of the words from there, and now we've come all into the Western world. If you have Hindu or Muslim friends who have come directly from India to the UK, and the way you can speak Gujarati with them, it's different. The dialect is different. We have a lot of Swahili words we chuck into there and other. So you can see the way people understand and relate to things depending on their language. Not only was the Quran revealed directly to the Meccan people, but if we make it even more exclusivist, to the Banu Hashim. And then, of course, it spread from there. So that's one thing about the language. Further, we've spoken about some metaphors and similes. If we look at, again, messed up some of the writing, but anyway, some of the verses in the Quran, how Allah has used similes. In Yasin, we all know that verse. وَالْقَمَرَ قَدَّرْنَاهُ مَنَازِلٍ. And the moon, we have ordained for it to go into phases, into stages. حَتَّى عَادَ كَالْعُرْجُونِ الْقَدِيمِ. Until it comes back and returns like al-urjun al-qadim, an old dry palm branch. You can understand the desert dwelling Arabs are cognizant of what a dry palm are. We understand now. Or, as Allah says in the Quran, talking about the ship of Nabi Nuh, the Ark of Noah, وَهِيَ تَجْرِي بِهِمْ فِي مَوْجٍ. And it flowed or it moved amid the waves with the people who Nuh had in the Ark. كَالْجِبَالِ وَنَادَى نُوحٍ ابْنَهُ. Like the waves, like mountains. Now we just saw Makkah was surrounded by mountains. Why is Allah using the simile of mountains here? Because people are seeing it all around. They know what mountains look like. They can appreciate that. But why isn't he using skyscrapers? Because there were none there. And people wouldn't know what skyscrapers were. Or the next verse, for example, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ. Do you not see your Lord? كَيْفَ مَدَّ الظِّلَّ وَلَوْ شَاءَ لَجَعَلَهُ سَاكِنًا. Do you not see your Lord, how He extends your shadows when the sun goes down? They're living in the desert, sunny. Now, if that came to us, we'll say, excuse me, what shadows? Because 9 months out of 12, we have cloudy skies. We hardly know what a shadow looks like. But in that context, this makes sense. The Quran was revealed in a context, and we can see that from its language. Not only from its language, but let's look at some of the concepts and conceptualizations that the Quran points to and refers to. Again, it'll tell us how the Quran came in a particular context. This is very interesting. In Surah Furqan, when Allah speaks about those people who are told to prostrate, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ اسْجُدُوا لِلرَّحْمَنِ. When it is told to them, اسْجُدُوا لِلرَّحْمَنِ, they are protesting. What do they say? They say, قالوا, they reply, وَمَا الرَّحْمَنِ. What's this Ar-Rahman? أَنَسْجُدُ لِمَا تَأْمُرُنَا. Should we prostrate? Should we do sajda to anything that you tell us to do sajda to? They're protesting. What does this tell us about sajda before the Prophet came and Islam came? What can we tell from that about sajda? If the people are protesting, what can we tell? Sorry? One, it was already there, so they understood what it means. That's one thing, sure. But they are protesting. What can we tell further about sajda from this? What can we infer? Not only they understand sajda, the word, it was there. But why are they protesting? If I told you, can you wave your hand at me? Okay, I don't know why Shaykh is asking that. It's a bit weird, but okay, I'll wave my hand. If I tell you, do sajda to me, you'll protest. So what can we tell about sajda? Not only was sajda existing, they understood sajda to be an act of devotion, an act of worship, an act of submission. They understood this. So sajda already existed. They were already doing it. Prophet didn't tell them, now I'm going to form a prayer, which we're going to stand like this, do ruku. No. They were already doing these things. Prophet said, we're going to orient these same actions. But to Ar-Rahman, they protested. They already knew what sajda is. So, the prayer we offer today, the form it's in today, is because the Meccans already had something very similar, including ruku', including sujood, including standing. And had they not had the prayer the way we do our prayers in Arabic. Why? Because the Islam came there and the prayer was in Arabic. If they prayed a different way, our prayer would be different today. And this is going on to what I'm going to say next now. So, when sajda they understand, it means something. Sajda meant something to them. That's why it's meaningful. That's why they protested. So, like a rose, if I give Zainab a rose and she appreciates it, why does she appreciate it? Because I understand a rose to be something. She understands it to symbolize something. When I give it to her, there's that appreciation there. We share a language here. But rose, it's just a plant that grows out of the ground and is surrounded by thorns. What's it got to do with love anyway? Nothing. Nothing. Why didn't she appreciate the same way if I picked up some weeds from the garden and gave it to her? She didn't. But the rose has this symbolic meaning that did Allah reveal in the Quran that rose means this? No. Was there any revelation? No. But there's nothing real behind a rose meaning love. There's nothing there. But because we share this understanding in this society, to us, rose can carry this message of love. But there's nothing real there. The sajda, the same thing. We together understand it as an act of submission, devotion. We can say, oh, because we put our most important part of our body to the ground, that's why it symbolizes. This is nothing real behind it. It's an imagined reality which we share. So now if I tell you, do sajda to me, you say, no. Why? Because we share this imagined reality that sajda means this. There's nothing real there. This is where even scholars, even from this institute, will differ with me on this opinion, that when we speak about form and essence of ibadah, we say form has a value, but I'm saying form has no value at all, except the shared imagined reality that we have attached to it. The sajda itself has no spiritual value, nothing. Like the rose has nothing to do with love, except that what we've attached to it, now it's meaningful. So the sajda meant something to them. This is what context, that was a bit of a digression, but this is the context the Quran was revealed in. And the whole, of course, concept of asbabun nuzul, literally meaning the reasons behind revelation. So Mahdiya was here when she was here last week. She mentioned this verse from Surah Mujadala, the beginning, وَقَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا وَتَشْتَكِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. Allah has heard the statement of that woman who disputes with you, and she's complaining to Allah about her husband. If that woman had not gone to the Prophet and done this verse wouldn't have come down. So the Quran we have with us today, we say, oh, it's eternal and okay. We'll see about that as well, what that means. But it's only the way it is because of what happened then. If the Quran was revealed in 2023 in Birmingham, and the Prophet came here and no woman went to him complaining about her husband, that verse wouldn't be part of it. It was only there because of what happened. And again, of course, we have, I think, about 14 times that this phrase is mentioned in the Quran. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ. Prophet, يَسْأَلُونَكَ. They are asking you about ruh, about day of judgment, about this, about that. Tell them. So had the people not asked a specific question about war booty, about whatever the soul, about ruh, then these verses wouldn't have been revealed. And if the Quran came down in another context, in another place, in another era, maybe those same questions wouldn't have been asked, and these verses wouldn't be there. So, all of these things tells us, one, that much of the Quran, the way we see it, was contingent on its context and its social context at the time. But what we can get from that also, I never can pronounce this word, the corollary, that the result of that is, of course, that if the Quran was to be revealed in a different context, well, it would look quite different. Okay, I've mentioned all of this. I'm going to skip this slide anyway. Made my point. But if we accept this point, what does this tell us now about the Quran's theology and the theological concepts we've built up as a result of the Quran? Remember what we said about shared imagined reality. So Allah is speaking in conversation to a people who understood certain things and is speaking to them in a certain way because they understand something, and because of that Allah is relating with certain words, certain meanings, certain things. Keeping that in mind, what can we understand about the depictions of heaven and hell? Now we have heaven and hell in our minds, what heaven looks like, primarily because of the Quran and the descriptions in it. For example, in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Allah says about the heaven, وَطَلْحٍ مَمْدُودٍ وَظِلٍّ مَمْدُودٍ. طَلْحٍ مَمْدُودٍ. Huge banana trees. وَظِلٍّ مَمْدُودٍ. And shade. Dhil is shade. Shade from what? Shade from the sun, because they're burning in the desert heat. Mamdud, as far, stretched out shade. If you told us this, we're traveling, spending thousands of pounds to go to Dubai so we can go into the sun. You're telling us heaven is going to be all shaded up? And وَفَاكِهَةٍ كَثِيرًا. So many fruits. They're in the desert heat. Imagine if we were to speak to our 5 and 6 year olds, do you want to go to heaven? Yeah. What would you like in heaven? Do you know there's going to be banana trees, shade, and lots of fruits? We have to force fruits down their throats for them to have something healthy. This is not the way you would describe them to a 5-year-old. This is the way you would describe heaven to desert-dwelling Arabs in the 7th century. Should it make up our imaginations of heaven, for example? Should it? That's something we have to think about. The nature of angels. Allah speaks about angels in the Quran as those things which have wings. And how many wings, you know? Mathna wa thulatha wa ruba'. 2 wings, 3 wings, 4 wings. So now we have these images in our minds of 2-winged angels. Okay, 4 wings, wow, powerful angel. 3 wings, I don't know how that's going to be, because 2 and then one's going to be rotating round and round, can't go anywhere. I don't know how. For us to imagine angels as these physical beings who, and we have a hadith about it, right? That every drop of rain is brought down to, so we imagine this angel flying down with a drop of rain, brings it down, millions of them coming down. And then in the grave, we have these 2 angels, one with a whip and one with a rod, and saying, Man Rabbuk. This is the stupidest way that in 2023 we can understand angels. So simple-minded and foolish. Angels are mechanisms through which Allah enacts His will. Period. That's it. They're not trinkets that Allah needs to create so that He can make them fly around and drop water on the floor. And this is silly. But for 7th century Arabs, it's a way of talking. Should our theology be built on how Allah, we have to, so when we say historicize the Quran, understand the language of it and how it's come down. That's theology. What about our jurisprudence? What about polygamy? Man can marry up to 4 wives. Well, even that's even the Quran is within context anyway. What about capital and corporal punishment? What about all the gender issues? What about the fact that what about slavery? That's a big one, right? Because the Quran sanctions slavery. Not only sanctions slavery, sanctions conjugal rights towards the slave because they're your ownership anyway, they're your property, they're not human beings in that context. And the entire, what we were talking about last week with Mahdiya, that the entire language of the Quran is incredibly gender skewed. What about all of these things? Unless we know that the Quran is within its context. So if I say Quran is contextual, a couple of things crop up then, problematic. What about when we say the Quran is eternal? There's no other message coming from Allah, divine message by angels being revealed. So are not the rules of the Quran and the fiqh of the Quran is not till the day of judgment? Should be, right? Because there are no other rules coming down. And the Quran is supposed to be perfect laws for all of mankind. Well, we have to ask, what about the Quran is eternal? So this again, this hadith from Imam al-Hasan al-Islam is a bit messed up on the screen, but let's read it quickly. Inna hadha al-Quran. So he's talking about this Quran. Imam Hassan says, alayhi salam, yaji'u yawm al-qiyamah qa'idan wa sa'iqa. The Quran will come forth on the day of judgment, guiding and driving. Who will it guide? Who will it drive? He says, يَقُودُ قَوْمًا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. It will guide people towards paradise who done what? أَحَلُّوا حَلَالَهُ وَحَرَّمُوا حَرَامَهُ وَآمَنُوا, and then so on and so forth. So people who made lawful what's lawful in the Quran and made haram, unlawful what's unlawful in the Quran, they will be guided to the paradise. And contrastingly, this Quran, وَيَسُوقُ قَوْمًا إِلَى النَّارِ, it will drive people to the hellfire. What did they do? ضَيَّعُوا حُدُودَهُ وَأَحْكَامَهُ وَاسْتَحِلُّوا مَحَارِمَهُ. They omitted its divine statutes and ruling, and they legalized the haram aspects. Now you're telling me, if you say all of this was contextual, inheritance, all the divorce and marriage laws in the Quran, and you're making haram, halal of the Quran, you're being driven to hell, as per this hadith, because the Quran is eternal, and the laws should be until the day of judgment. So, quickly to explain, what about the Quran is eternal? We have two concepts in the Quran. We have the mafahim, which are universal concepts, and the masadiq, how those concepts are enacted and applied. So talking about the mafahim, for example, Allah says in the Quran, وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. Adl. When you pass judgment between people, do so with adl. What's adl? Do you think the people of Mecca, when the Quran was revealed, when they said adl, they knew what adl means? Did they know or they didn't know? Allah says adl, but Prophet, what did adl mean? Did they know or they didn't know? They had an idea, right? Allah says, Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. Allah commands you towards adl, we said it's justice, and ihsan, being kind. So the people didn't ask, Prophet, we don't know what these terms mean. We've never heard of them before. No, they had an idea of what these terms mean. وَأَن تَقُومُوا لِلْيَتَامَى بِالْقِسْطِ. Again, qist means justice in a different way. So they had an idea of what these terms mean. Because these are mafahim. Al-adl, al-ihsan, and al-qist were already notions that they were already aware of. Why? Because they are universal concepts. However, how those concepts are then brought into applied instances is contextual, based on time and place, values and understandings and traditions. And the scholars, of course, look at the Quran and split certain things into time and place. So this is very general splitting. They say a lot of the verses in Makkah contained universal mafahim or concepts about justice, about kindness. When they went to Medina and now there's a state structure in which you can have law, then they became applied. Does that mean they have to be applied the same way in 2023 or no? The mafahim are universal. The way they are applied, not necessarily. Again, this is a very quick example because we're in the month of Ramadan. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفْرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. Those of you who are sick or traveling, then they should fast in different days. This is from the masadiq, how it's being applied into fasting. What's the universal principle behind that though? Allah says in the Quran, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah wishes ease for you, doesn't want hardship for you. If that principle is applied this way we're living now, its application is different, then it has to be applied in a different way. It's the mafahim which are universal, not their application, even though the application is in the Quran. Okay, now I'm finishing. And just to illustrate this, one analogy. So this father is telling his young son, telling him off really. He's telling him, look, this boy, he didn't let his sister play on the Xbox. He was hogging the Xbox. He was monopolizing his time over the Xbox. So the father told his son, look, be fair and let your sister also play the video game. There's two aspects here. Be fair. Now, when this boy grew up, there's 2 points being made here. Be fair and the application of that fairness. The boy, when he grew up to be 25 years old, hopefully we don't have to police our kids video gaming at that age, but when the boy grew up, in his mind, if he conflates the two, he said, okay, father told me be fair and let my sister play the video game. So fairness is being let play the video game. When he becomes 25 years old, my father said be fair. Now my sister is 23 or 22. I'll give her the video game to play as well because I'm being fair. No. Be fair was the concept, the universal concept the father was giving the son. The application of that at that age when they were 7 and 5 years old was that. When they become 25 years old, the concept remains. The application of it is different. Now when we look at the Quran and Allah said adl, ihsan, qist, fairness, justice, equality, X, Y, Z, and at the application of that is half of inheritance and is polygamy and is marriage laws and divorce laws. Does that mean when we grow up as a humanity, we have to apply the same way? I'm finishing. Last slide. A story. This is a story about this man in the middle and his 2 sons. This man was a visionary. He built a factory in an impoverished area and he empowered the people of that area by giving them jobs. Huge factory, and he was a very wealthy person, very successful factory. As he was dying, he was a very good man. People loved him. Why? Because he was empowering them. They didn't have jobs, they didn't have food, didn't have money. He gave them employment, he empowered them, and they loved him. When he was dying, he told his 2 sons, I'm dying. You are the CEOs of the company now. I have one instruction for you. My boys, he said, you must run this factory exactly as I have run it. Full stop. And he died. Fine. Boys took over. They were doing a good job. A decade later, the employees now, what happened was inflation grew and the people couldn't really afford to feed themselves and their families anymore. So they came to the 2 CEOs now, the sons, and they said, look, we need a pay rise. Things are getting expensive. You know, the factory's doing really well. We're working really hard. We need a pay rise. Son number 1 said, look, I know times are hard, but our father said, we have to run it exactly as he ran it. That means you're being paid £1,000 a month for your work when father was alive. I wish we could do something for you. But as far as your payment is concerned, he told us, and he wrote it and he stamped it, we have to run it exactly as he runs it, and that means you can only have £1,000 a month. I'm really sorry. Brother number 2 said, my brother, you didn't understand what father was saying. Father established this factory exactly as he did it. We have to do it. How did he do it? He empowered the impoverished. He enabled those who were unable. He gave money to those who didn't have. He brought the people up and educated them. When he said we have to run it exactly as he runs it, this is what he meant. Give them a pay raise because times are different. If we want to lift them out of poverty the way exactly as he did, we have to up their pay. If we want to empower them exactly as he did, we have to up their pay. Now, question. Allah told us to run the show exactly as the Prophet told us in the Quran. Which brother are you going to agree with? And so you don't ask me any difficult questions. The point here is to baffle you all with this question so you trouble yourselves and not me. Is, should fallible people now today have the agency to adapt and change the Quran's revelated divine legislation? And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
I think we need a full discussion circle on that alone. If there's a quick question, we can, a couple of minutes. Yasin?
Assalamu alaikum. Man, I never find myself in the position of having to defend a more conservative position. But today, a couple of things. A couple of things. One is in terms of the point. I agreed with maybe 90% of 70% of what you said. The reverse abrogation stuff is really interesting. So the demarcation between Mecca and Medina, I think that's a really serious one to me. It's generalized point, but I think that is a very good way of demarcating the universal principles from those that were infected with polity. Mahmoud Taha, yeah. But can I make one point that I found troubling from your talk, and it was the example about the rose and the sajda, the idea that some of the things, some of the concepts mentioned in the Quran, including that of heaven and hell, have no value except our shared realities around it.
I said the sajda, and I pointed to that specifically in terms of an instance of form of worship has no value, including the tawaf, including the sa'i, all of these things. The depictions of Jannah and Jahannam in the Quran, that was not part of the same slide. Yeah. So I'm not saying they don't have any value. I'm saying Allah is talking to the people in a way they understand. Should they form the same images in our minds? Not necessarily. In terms of sajda, yeah, that's something has no value. The physical aspect in of itself, except the shared reality that we have with it. In the one about Jannah, Jannah, even angels, yeah, Allah is talking to people in a way they understand. Maybe our conceptions might be different, or should be different.
So I guess what I would ask is, where so how are you taking those universals, how are you taking the universality of those concepts away? And the reason I'm asking is, when we look at the Quran, to me, when the Quran talks about heaven in terms of tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, like these naturist, I feel like it's actually tapped into something remarkably valuable about human nature. When we talk about sajda, I feel like the reason why sajda was there before is not because it's meaningless, or the fact that it was there before does not make it meaningless, but rather because it was a shared, because it has such an intrinsic value that it was passed from people even before the time of the Prophet. What I'm saying is, I feel like there's reasoning behind these things which are more of a spiritual nature and that do go beyond context.
Okay, Mohammed saying very quick, so I'm going to answer very quickly, but we can carry on later. And for that supposition that we have sajda existing there before, and therefore it has spiritual value intrinsically, we need evidence for this, which we don't have, is a supposition. Second thing is the fact that we have this prayer and the form is in now. Other people of other religions don't have access to these deeds which are spiritually intrinsic because they don't belong to this religion, because the arbitrary nature of their birth contravenes God's justice, and it's not acceptable. That's two things there. We don't have any evidence that these acts have intrinsic spiritual nature in them. And even this aspect about heaven and heaven, sure, they have value. I'm not reducing it to the fact that only because they thought of it this way, that's why I was talking to them in that way. However, they are not universally appealing. That's a fact. They are not. Tajri min tahti al-anhar, someone who lives in Sweden and has gardens beneath its rivers flowing, saying, I'm already here. What do I need this your heaven for? It's not universally appealing. And therefore, or to the 5-year-old who doesn't want fruits and this, it's not universally appealing. That's a fact. And therefore, we cannot universalize these concepts. They are definitely subjective, and therefore, when you talk to people, you are talking to them in their language, and for better or for worse, for better, they have formed our conceptions of heaven. For worse, they've essentialized our conceptions of heaven.
Thank you. It's a shame we don't have more time, but I'm sure we can continue this conversation later, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaykh. So tomorrow's program will start at 7 o'clock with Quran and Dua Iftita, and followed by the talk Ramzan Reflections of the Heart by Sheikh Yasin Devji, followed by Maghrib, Iftar and Isha Salat. Tomorrow after Isha prayers, we will have a discussion circle on authentic spirituality in the West, which will be facilitated by Sheikh Yasin Devji and Dr. Zohair Ismail. And there's no registration needed for the discussion circle, and also there is no live streaming for that. Just a reminder that there's no T4L program for children tomorrow. Then we have 3 programs on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday for the Shahadat of Imam Ali. The talk will be delivered by Sheikh Arif on Imam Ali and spirituality. And please kindly register if you're planning to come to any of those. We will also have Laylatul Qadr Spiritual Night on Sunday and Tuesday from 9:30 p.m. The posters will be out soon, inshallah. We're also still in need of your kind donation for Time for Change program. And also, please kindly keep on supporting Who is Hussein. You can provide a hot drink and meal for just £2 per person. All the links have already been shared on our WhatsApp group. Can I request you all to please recite a Surah Fatiha for all those who are unwell, for Marhuma Bilkis Moti and all Marhumin Al-Fatiha.
Just prepare for Salah now, please. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر الله أكبر